Welcome back, friend. Tonight, we start at Baikonur, October 4, 1955, when a polished aluminum sphere called Sputnik 1 began singing on 20.005 and 40.002 megahertz, and the Cold War learned to listen. 2 months later, in California, a rumor says a fragment fell into a backyard before official re-entry, and a $50,000 reward dangled in headlines like a lure. If that story hardens wrong, a good teacher could be charged, a community silenced, and panic inked into history as fact. I am Snorelock Holmes, the quiet detective who walks history's sharp edges so you don't have to. Before we drift, tell me in the comments which city you're listening from tonight. Your work now is only to breathe and listen. I will carry the weight of the mystery for you. Chapter 1. It was a lamplit evening in my study, the kind that made the world feel as simple as warm tea and good wood grain. My old shortwave receiver purred on the credenza, vacuum tubes glowing like miniature hearths. When I turned the dial, the needle slid with a steady patience, stepping past distant voices and gentle static like sand. Penelope, my sleepy old beagle, had curled herself into a comma on a folded blanket. She snored in slow punctuation. I catalogued the receiver the way some people garden, careful, unhurried, content. On the side table sat a small spool of tape with a label in neat pencil, Sputnik 1, 20.005 megahertz, October 1950 FID. I threaded it through the player. The room filled with the simplest music in the world. Beep, pause, beep. The little heart of a metal sphere that flew faster than fear. Those beeps had circled a globe and slipped through tin-roof kitchens and barn lofts and school science rooms. A steady metronome, a reminder that history is sometimes just a sound. I had been making notes by the light of a banker's lamp, serial number, condition, a few penciled observations about the stepwise action of the tuning cap, when someone knocked as if they were racing a clock. 3 sharp raps, a breath, 2 more. I did not start tart. I don't waste start on doors. I pressed the stop button on the tape, the beeps fading into the soft hum of the tubes, and went to answer. On the stoop stood a boy with wind-bitten cheeks and a spiral notebook hugged to his chest. He held a shoebox as if it might buck. His breath fogged in the cold. He wore a plaid. His hair was combed because someone asked him to, but not because he cared. A headset hung around his neck like a borrowed stethoscope. "Mr. Holmes?" he said, voice pitched between hope and fear. "Sir, I'm Tomas. Tommy Alvarez, KNXTMA. Please, I didn't know where else." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "Slow breaths in my house. Your gear can keep up." He shot a glance over his shoulder. Tires hissed on the wet street. A grey sedan idled across the way, then slid on, as if deciding to be a shadow somewhere else. He entered. I shut the door. The room regained its peace like a lake after a pebble. Penelope raised her head. Decided the boy was no threat. Slept again. Tommy stood in the glow of the lamp with a dignity I liked. The shoebox trembled in his hands. "They're taking everything," he said. "They said it's Soviet. They took Ms. Park's piece. I saved this flake, please, Mr. Holmes." He set the box on my desk with careful fingertips. His nails had solder stains. His knuckles were freckled with the small round burns of a life spent close to hot wires and patience. "Sit," I said, "and tell me what you brought." He sat. He didn't touch the tea I pushed toward him at first. He clasped his hands around the cup after a moment, as if steadiness could be absorbed. I lifted the lid. Inside lay a folded cleaning cloth, a spiral-bound radio log, a Polaroid pinned with a paperclip, and 2 wrapped packets. The packets whispered when I moved them. The cloth smelled faintly of smoke and lemon oil. He nodded to the box. "Please look, but they might come back." "Then we won't waste time," I said. I unraveled the first packet onto a white card. A sliver of darkened metal rolled into view, the size of a fingernail, edges scalloped by heat. It was slightly curved, as if born of a sphere or a cylinder. Under the soot, the surface showed a fine, even grain. The second packet revealed a small, brittle square of layered black material, the layers like pastry if pastry had been baked in a furnace. Tiny glassy flecks kissed the surface, each one a pinhead of frozen light. "This fell in a backyard?" I kept my voice soft. He nodded. "Ms. Park's backyard. She's my physics teacher, Kay Sems's EVP on the air." December 8th, around 6:15. We were listening to the pass. The beeps were strongest we ever heard. Then a hiss, like a soda can opening, but far. A little pop. In her yard we saw a line on the grass, like a comb had scratched it, and one lemon tree had freckles on the leaves. We found a little bead and these bits. We took notes. We called the Air Force because, you know, the papers, the reward. Next day, men with clipboards came. They said it's not safe. They took the big piece and said not to talk. They left a receipt that said they took property. What does that even mean? Who were they? They said Office of Special Investigations. OSI. They were polite. Just. Firm. Ms. Park kept calm, but He looked at the shoebox. His voice. I panicked. I pocketed these without telling her. I was going to give them right back, but then I thought, if I give them back, they're gone. And Ms. Park gets scared for nothing. "You did a brave thing," I said. "Bravery isn't always loud." I opened the spiral log. He had marked the date and time. Deck 8, 1950 Ths, 1807 to 1812 PST. Signal strength columns with tidy numbers. 20.005 MHz S9 plus at peak. 40.002 MHz weaker, fading in and out. He had drawn a simple map of the pass from an International Geophysical Year chart pinned to his wall. A clean mind's work. The Polaroid was of a fence post in twilight. A clean black kiss across its top, and in the background a lemon tree with speckles burned into a few leaves. The kind of mark that says heat visited but didn't linger. The ground in the picture looked neat, swept, domestic, not a battlefield, a home. I lifted the metal flake with tweezers. Under its soot, under the rough, I could feel a repeat in the surface, laminations perhaps. I turned it under the lamp. A ghost of a stamping wavered in the light. Not a full mark, just the edge of a character. An American-style font, perhaps. My eyes half-lidded the way they do when the brain is warmer than the hands. Not proof, but a whisper. I brought the black square to my nose. The smell walked straight back to laboratories and machine rooms. Phenolic resin, same scent that clings to some plastics, electrical panels, and heat shield experiments. On the surface, tiny glass spheres winked in the lamp, the sort used to lighten materials and handle heat. Interesting companions for something that allegedly fell from the first Soviet satellite, a polished aluminum sphere that, in public diagrams, didn't wear anything like this. Tommy watched my face, searching for hope. Is it Sputnik? It is a puzzle, I said, and puzzles are shy. We coax them, we don't scare them. I set his log back in the box like a small treasure. He exhaled in a way that emptied his shoulders. Ms. Park didn't want the reward. She just wanted to turn it in proper. Then those men came. They talked like they were helping. But my aunt says help doesn't take receipts like that. They said if anything else turns up and she keeps it, that's government property. Theft. Can they do that? They can say many things in December of 1950, I said. The world is jumpy, but there are still rules. I poured him tea. He took it now, hands wrapped around the cup, eyes on the steam. Can you help her? He asked. The question held the plain weight of kindness. I can try, I said. I do not promise what the world will not let me deliver. That I knew. The stakes were not a curiosity. If the wrong story hardened around these bits, a story stamped with panic and bureaucracy, a teacher could be charged. A boy could be made to feel foolish for listening to the sky, and a gentle community of hams could be taught to keep their ears closed. That would be a quiet wound in a loud time. I folded the cloth over the fragments. The beep-beep from the idle tape in the player seemed to echo in the wood. Somewhere outside, a car door closed with a thick sound. Stay here a moment, I said. Eat one of those biscuits. They crumble like old secrets. He smiled despite himself. Good. Bravery needs sugar now and then. I crossed to the window. The street had gone empty in the calm way of late night, when even trouble feels lazy. I adjusted the blinds, returned to the desk, and made a small note in my pocketbook. Deck, 8:15 p.m. Beep strength, hiss pop, lemon freckles, men with clipboards, receipt. Tommy, I said, I will go where the beeps began and where the lawn was singed, and I will stand between your teacher and any bad story that tries to swallow her. But first, I need to know everything you saw and heard, not the best parts, all of it. He nodded and straightened in his chair as if answering attendance. Yes, sir, he said, and then he began. Chapter 2, in which the beeps meet the backyard. He told it twice, once quickly, then again slowly, and I preferred the second tale. It started with an almanac, tacked above his desk. International Geophysical Year past predictions he copied from a magazine. The IGY was a global science project that, for a year and a half, invited every nation to study our planet, honest and thorough. In that window, the Soviets launched Sputnik 1. Anyone with a radio could hear it. That democratized wonder is rare. On December 8, the chart said a bright pass would cross Southern California just after dark. Tommy and his neighbor teacher, Evelyn Park, had set up early. Evelyn was K-Sex-E-V-P, a call sign that folded her name into her air. She was a physics teacher with a calm voice and a talent for making teenagers feel smart rather than small. He described her cat-eye glasses, hair fastened with a pin, a charcoal cardigan, and a clipboard that looked part of her arm. She had burned her wrist once in a lab demonstration and wore the small crescent scar like a moon that belonged to her. They tuned Evelyn's rig, a clean old transmitter receiver, and checked antennas. He explained it for me, even though I already knew, because good explanations are their own comfort. Sputnik beeps on 20.005 MHz, and on 40.002, the lower frequency is easier for us to catch. It's zest, a tiny transmitter on the sphere. Batteries, a thermostat, a pressure switch. No voice. It's like a lighthouse, an electronic one. He looked down at his hands. We could hear it from across the world. At 00 Fenbischio he rose. A lèvre inner. They stepped outside to the backyard, the radio faint in Tommy's shirt pocket, a cord dragging like a leash to reality. The night smelled like citrus and cold earth. Overhead, stars were damped by a thin haze that glowed above Pasadena in the distance. At 6:12 the beeps peaked, then frowned in thought. A short hiss, like something travelling fast through a straw. Then a pop, not loud, like a finger tap. And then the smell changed. What kind of change? I asked. Like when the soldering iron touches resin, but cleaner? Not like fireworks, like hot plastic and something sharp. Ms. Park said, "Tommy?" I said, "I heard it." We pointed the flashlights. There was a line in the grass, a small divot by the lemon tree, and little specks on a few leaves. We picked up one bead. Oof, it was still warm, and a few flakes and that square. We dropped them on a tin tray. Ms. Park made me write the time. She said we should call the Air Force if any of it was Soviet, even though the Soviets said Sputnik would burn up in January. He turned his log toward me. His numbers were neat, S9 plus at peak, fading over 9 minutes. He drew a small arrow that showed the satellite's path from northwest to southeast. He had even noted the Vanguard failure 2 days prior American satellite launch that became a fireball inches off the pad on December 6, a public embarrassment replayed on televisions in living rooms across the country. Everyone was shaky, he said quietly. The papers kept a missile gap. We hear grown-ups whispering. Ms. Park said, "That's politics, not science." She says science is careful. "The best sentence in the world," I said. He smiled. They had called a number listed under Air Force information. The person on the other end had been interested, polite, and quick. They asked what we had, if we had a big piece. Ms. Park said we had a bead the size of a marble and some flakes. They said there was a reward in some cases, but they didn't handle that. They said not to talk to reporters. They said someone would come by. They came the next morning. Men with clipboards and pressed coats. Their shoes were very clean. They did not show guns. They did show badges. Office of Special Investigations. They said OSI. Like it was supposed to make us feel safe, Tommy said. They asked to see everything. They took the bead and they took our tray. They left a receipt. It said one item, metallic sphere fragment, custody OSI, lot, SAC-CA8812. It didn't say where it was going, Ms. Park asked. The man said the destination was under review. He said if anything else turned up, we were required to turn it over, or else it could be theft of government property. He opened the shoebox and handed me a pale yellow carbon slip. I angled it in the light. There was a blank line where a destination should have been, scratched out so firmly with a pen that you could see the irritation in the paper fibers. Above the lot number, a faint pressure mark from a different layer of the pad suggested words had once been written there. I tilted it, breathed on it, watched the sheen of oil in the paper reveal ghosts. Not yet. The paper would give it up later, under angled light and patient eyes. Tommy had snuck what he could. "I know it's wrong to take it," he said, "but it felt worse to take it and never know." "Well," I said, "you didn't take government property." "Not yet. You removed a question mark and brought it to me. I specialize in question marks." I turned to the evidence. I held the sliver of metal under a jeweler's loupe. The surface showed layers, as if an object made of sheet had been exposed to heat and stress. In one tiny summit on the underside, a ghost of stamped text tried to be seen. The curved edge suggested part of a skin, perhaps from a sphere or a cylinder or even a domed cap. The color peeking through the soot was the familiar dull silver of aluminum alloy, not an exotic polished magnesium. Aluminum comes in many recipes. Numbers stamped on American parts often say so. The ghost's posture, depth, and font sang in American. The small square of layered black material was more blatant, phenolic, an early plastic that loves electricity and heat when built right. The layers suggested a laminate. In the surface glittered microballoons, hollow glass spheres used to reduce density and handle heat. It was the sort of thing one might stick on the nose of a test model to see how it behaved on the way back from the edge of space. I turned it over. On the back, under the soot, something white flickered. Not paint. A stencil. ABX 5512, it wanted to say. That the 8 might have been a 3. The year was clear to my eyes. 57. December, perhaps. Abigail exhibit? No. Ablative experiment? Possibly. "Have you told Ms. Park you kept these?" I asked. "Not yet. I wanted to bring them to someone who, doesn't yell first." "I prefer not to yell," I said. "It scuffs the words." I set the fragments down and looked at the boys' notes again. IGY had invited the whole world to show their maps. The Soviets had used that invitation to put a beeping circle into the sky, and then a second, heavier one with a dog called Laika. The Americans had stumbled on television with Vanguard and were preparing their army team to try with Explorer 1. The country was raw with pride and fear. In such a season, every bit of metal fell into a story before it hit the ground. "If I don't help," I said, "this is what could happen. Ms. Park could face charges if someone wants to make a point. The hamnets will grow quiet. People who like to listen will wonder if listening is dangerous. And a newspaper will print a confident sentence that is not true, and children will memorize it, and a lie will become a stair that other lies will stand on." I said it plainly. Panic is a poor tool for science. Tommy inhaled, then held it, then let it go. "So, what do? We do what sleepy detectives do," I said. "We visit the place where it happened. We watch the men who like clipboards. We lift paper and look for the words it didn't mean to show. We test the sliver, and we give Ms. Park a quiet path out." I tapped the beeping tape on the player. The beeps began in Kazakhstan, in a launch site called Baikonur. But I think our truth is right here in California. We don't need to chase the sphere. We need to understand the hiss and the pop and why your lemon leaves have freckles. He looked older by a year and lighter by a pound. "Do you sleep, Mr. Holmes?" "I sleep quite well," I said. "It's where I do most of my traveling." He stared in that uncertain way that doesn't know whether to ask a joke to repeat itself. I removed the spool of beeps from the player and set it gently aside. Then I wound my watch, a small ritual of control. I moved the hands to a time I already knew by heart. 000 on January 4, 1958. That was when the first Soviet satellite, Sputnik 1, would officially burn up in the atmosphere. The world would later say, tidy and well, that the metal fell then and not before. If a crate of debris left California by that hour, its story would harden alongside the announcement. We have less than a month in the world of the story, I said, but only a night in mine. I slipped the sliver back into its wrapper. I will walk there now, in the way I know. Chapter 2, in which the beeps turn into crickets. Tommy watched with the respectful confusion, reserved for magic that smells like wood polish instead of incense. He set his cup down carefully and looked around my study as if he were trying to memorize where the safety lived, in case he ever had to come back and borrow some. I will need to borrow the sliver, I said. Not to take. To look at somewhere it knows how to be measured. You will keep the log and the square for now. Hide them in a book and use a dull pencil for a bookmark. No sharp pens near important paper. Yes, sir. If anyone knocks, be polite. Polite people confuse those who like to press with thuts. Yes, sir. He smiled again, smaller but honest. I dimmed the lamp till the brass looked like old honey. I tuned the receiver to 20.005 megahertz, the lower frequency of Sputnik's heart. The needle settled with a small, satisfied twitch. The tubes glowed steady. Beep, beep. The tape was off now. The signal was a recorded copy I had made, a comfort metronome, a memory of the world's first honest panic. I drew a breath in time with it. Out, in, out. The hum of the receiver and the warmth of the tube glass and the clean odor of varnished wood made a cradle out of the room. I set my watch on the desk. The face turned toward me. The hands read 0300, January 4, 1958. This was not a schedule. It was a promise, a hinge. The moment when a story the size of a planet would take a breath and say, no more. All that matters for my work are hinges and breaths. I loosened my tie, the brown wool sliding under my collar with a sigh. I sat in my chair, the old leather familiar under my shoulders, the cushion forgiving in a way that says what it forgives stays forgiven. Penelope snored. Tommy sat small and earnest on the edge of his chair. I closed my eyes. The trick to walking into a story is not to run. It is to let the room tilt, just enough to spill you where you need to go. The beeps softened. My breath kept their rhythm. The hum of the tubes stretched like taffy and thinned into a sound that wasn't a sound at all. The soft hush of a winter evening far from my street. The warm smell of wood gave way to the faint oil and dust scent of a California garage. The leather under me cooled and became a vinyl stool with a little tear on the edge that had been repaired with loving, ugly tape. I opened my eyes in the San Gabriel Valley, late 1950 said. Twilight held the streets like a polite host, ushering day out without hurrying it. Orange blossom air laced with damp earth and a distant hint of gasoline drifted past. Power lines ticked quietly with a little heat. A low haze made the world feel folded, all edges softened. Houses sat modest and squared, front porches in their best sweaters of light. Somewhere, a commuter train dragged a breathy sigh across the valley, a lullaby of steel on steel. Behind me, the receiver I'd been tuning seemed to still exist, but it had become a small ham-shack bench against a garage wall. On it were neatly labelled drawers, a soldering iron in a stand, and a postcard pinned above that said Jet Propulsion Laboratory with a picture of an antenna. A wire ran up through a hole in the eaves. Outside, an aluminum antenna creaked as it accepted the evening breeze. I could feel its line through the house like a single string on a guitar, tuned to the planet. I rose and stepped carefully into the yard. The grass was short. A lemon tree stood in one corner, its fruit like small moons with paws. Along the back fence, a faint char line marked a path in the grain where heat had kissed wood and left. The soil by the lemon tree had a little hollow, neat as a thumbprint. A few leaves wore freckles, brown dots where something warm had been close enough to whisper but not long enough to shout. I knelt. The dirt felt cool now, the heat long gone. I pinched a pinch and brought it to my nose. Yes, there. Not fireworks, not meteor. A thin, bitter scent of cured plastic, the sort used for electric things that do not wish to fuss while hot, and a faint echo of kerosene, the way it clings to air long after the liquid has fled. The street beyond the fence was quiet. A mailbox clinked as it cooled. Somewhere down the block a dog gave one skeptical bark and then decided it did not care for mysteries tonight. The porch light from the nearest house laid a patch of warm on the ground. A neighbour's radio played a muffled big band, all brass smoothed by walls. I looked at the lemon leaves again and smiled. A small, private smile. They were the kind of freckles heat gives when it passes quickly, not the tearing burns of a larger, wild thing. The story here promised to be subtle, which is the best kind of promise for tired people who still like to be surprised. I straightened and let the breath leave me slow. I was here. I had from now until a crate's midnight and a satellite's dawn to let the truth be believed. I put my hands in my pockets the way a man does when he's ready to do the polite kind of work, listening, watching, asking for papers. Across the street, a late-model grey sedan drifted by, unhurried, its engine a patient murmur. It did not stop. It did not need to. People who feel official believe that arrival is a state more than an act. I watched its taillights melt into the dusk and then turned back to the yard. Somewhere in the house, a phone rang. Someone said hello, with the wary courtesy of a teacher, and somewhere far away, my beagle snored. I smiled again. The world is big enough to hold both. And I walked toward the back steps, toward the kitchen door, toward the first conversation of the night, already calm, already certain of the shape of the puzzle, if not the name of its maker. The beeps were gone. The crickets had taken over, and that was all right. Crickets keep time as well as satellites when you know how to listen. Chapter 4. Lemons, Static, and the Watching Sedan. The San Gabriel Valley received me with the sigh of winter air and the hush of a neighborhood holding its breath. I stood under a pale sky that still remembered the day and listened to the low power line hum as if it were another radio band. The street was a neat ribbon, driveways, hedges, porch lights blooming warm behind screen doors. Somewhere to my left, a commuter train coasted on its rails, distant enough to sound like a yawn. Evelyn Park's bungalow waited where the curb dipped beast a little. The antenna on her roof creaked. A straight wooden fence ran along the side yard, and on its slats a faint, finger-wide kiss of black ran like a ruler line. At the base of a lemon tree, the grass gave way to a shallow circle of disturbed soil. That was the mark we had crossed, the dream for. 200 feet down the road, a grey sedan idled, windows up, its exhaust puffed in small, regular breaths. Inside, two silhouettes sat in the kind of stillness that says waiting is part of the job. A neighbour across the street raked a broom over his porch and did not look up when I passed. He said it without saying it. Air Force again. Tommy's bicycle lay on Evelyn's front walk like a dog that couldn't be bothered to stand. Tommy himself appeared from the side of the house with the energy of a spring. "Mr. Holmes," he whispered, then corrected himself with a grin and a swallow. "Snorelock. Sorry." "No harm done," I murmured. "We'll keep our voices soft." I went straight to the fence. Kneeling, I traced the little black line with the back of my finger. The soot came away clean, too even to be a random scorch. It was a line that had been drawn by motion. A thin wedge of air had been hot for a moment here. I moved to the lemon tree and squinted at the leaves. A spray of brown freckles dusted their edges, the way steel dust will pepper a magnet. "Do you smell that?" I asked. Tommy crouched beside me. He nodded, like shop class. "The resin when Mr. Liang sands the fiberglass." A fair description for 17. To me, it was phenolic, cured and old, with a note of something like kerosene. Not the metallic tang I'd expect from a meteor, not the clean electric bite of an electrical short. This was industrial and deliberate. I slipped on thin gloves. With a pocket comb, I teased the soil in the shallow pit. The earth came away grudgingly, clumped and black at the top and clean beneath. There were peppercorn dots of soot and a few glassy specks like frozen dew. Then, under a smear of ash, a curved half-pellet winked. I lifted it into my palm. It was the size of a pea, dark on the outside, bright along a fracture. The bright part showed a layered grain, and tucked in that grain was a ghost of a stamp. I tilted it. The stamp resolved. 2024-T4, I read. Tommy breathed in through his teeth. "Is that Soviet?" "No," I said gently. "It's very American. 2024 is an aluminum alloy used for aircraft structures. T4 means it's been solution heat-treated and naturally aged. If I were building wings in 1950, I'd see this all the time. Sputnik's polished sphere was a different recipe. They did not stamp their interior pieces with this code. This half-pellet belonged to something we made." A porch step creaked. Evelyn stood at the back door with the porch light off, her outline precise even in shadow. Cat-eye glasses caught the bit of sky and gave it back as two small coins. "They've been around all day," she said. "We should talk inside." I glanced down the street. The sedan's driver leaned forward just enough to show interest. I nodded, and the three of us slipped through the back door and into the kitchen. The air smelled faintly of citrus and coffee and chalk dust, the perfume of a teacher's house after 9. "Major Harlan sent men this morning," Evelyn said without preamble. "Clipboards, shoe covers, very polite." They took the bead, the soil, the bit of fence they could pry loose. She slid a carbon paper receipt across the table with 2 fingers. They gave me this and told me not to speak with reporters. I asked about the reward in the paper. A very thin smile, and the words, "Not applicable at this time." I read the top line of the receipt. Inventory, SAC A-A812. Origin, civilian collection. Destination, a rectangle of white where someone had pressed hard with a pen and then used more pressure to blot. The carbon paper had caught a deeper story under that blank. I held it at an angle and let the kitchen light scrape across it. A whisper of letters rose where a typewriter had once tapped with confidence. WADC MAT LAB, Wright Air Development Center, Materials Laboratory, Wright, Patterson, Ohio. If it were truly foreign, if this were truly Soviet, the chain would have looked different. It would have touched the FBI, the State Department Liaison to International Geophysical Year Committees, or Air Technical Intelligence Center. Here instead was an Air Force Materials Lab, right destination for a question about domestic alloys and ablators. I set the receipt down and reached into my pocket for the pea-sized pellet. It made a friendly sound against the plate. "May I keep this until morning?" I asked. "We need a test." JPL has kind eyes at night. Evelyn's mouth tightened, then softened. "If it will keep my students off a blacklist, you can have the moon." I nodded. "We will need less than that." We stepped back into the yard. I returned to the lemon tree and let my hands settle into the slow work of searching. The grass gave up more peppering, and 2 more glass Ebe Adides stuck to my glove. They were hollow spheres the size of fine sand, microballoon. In the 1950s, American engineers mixed glass microballoons into phenolic resins to lighten and insulate ablative heat shields. They melt and vitrify under heat, making a glassy crust that carries heat away by shedding. I held my gloved fingers up so that Tommy could see the tiny glints. "These are not Soviet radio beeps," I said. "These are American decisions." A car door clicked down the block. The 2 silhouettes in the sedan became shoulders and coats. They took 2 steps our way and stopped. Not an attack, such a reminder. I made a note of the distance to the back fence, the hinge squeak, the way the porch boards complained under a heel. The neighborhood was quiet, but not sleeping. The threat was present, but polite. "Major Harlan is thorough," Evelyn said, calm and firm. "He is also wrong." "Perhaps," I said. "We will not prove that here, tonight, but we can collect the truth before it goes walking into a crate at March Air Force Base." Tommy tilted his head. "March? That's where they took it." "Wright-Patterson is far away," I said. "March is the step in between." The receipt knows where it wants to go, even if the blank says otherwise. I rose, brushed my gloves together, and let the lemon tree exhale around me. The air was cooling. A faint marine layer edged the sky. The world had the feeling of a problem just before it is solved. Nothing loud, only edges aligning. Chapter 5, in which we discover a scrap, a scent, and a plan in the making. Evelyn's living room had the order of a mind that liked things to sit in their proper places. Books, lined, a turntable, a tidy family photo. On the coffee table, 3 paperbacks faced up like small shields. The Microbe Hunters, Silent Spring clipped from a magazine early, and a dog-eared copy of Principles of Radar the school library had let her keep past due because she had no intention of not teaching it. "Tea?" she asked. "If the kettle doesn't mind making a sound," I said. "Sound could be a cover." She smiled and set the kettle on. The little rattle of water in the pipes moved like a small armada through the walls, and I felt the house relax. But it is easier to speak under a friendly noise. Tommy had already produced his spiral notebook and was setting his pencil to the margins, as if facts would sprint away without harness. December 8, he said, tapping the page. Small teen PM. Beeps loud on 20 megacycles, weaker on 40. Signal strength peaked at small 19. Then a hiss. Not on the radio, in the air. Like a match. A small pop and the line on the fence. He flipped the page and laid down a Polaroid. The fence post. The char kiss neat as a signature. I took that before they yanked the slat. You called the Air Force, I said. Because of the reward, he said without shame. The paper said $50,000 if you found a piece, remember? We're not rich. I thought, why not ask? Ms. Park said I should. Right away, they knew our names. Next morning, 2 cars. Evelyn returned with cups. The steam smelled of lemon rind and black tea, a teacher's care in a cup. She set one down in front of me and another in front of Tommy, who lifted it with both hands, as if his own steam might give him courage. They had shoe covers, Evelyn said. They were careful, not cruel. They did not want to break anything they did not have to. That is what made me nervous. People who are sloppy are usually only dangerous to themselves. These men were careful in the way of people who carry a secret for a living. One of them kept smoothing the corners of the receipt before he wrote on it, like a ritual. SAC CA 8812, I read again. Strategic Air Command, California, a sequence number. Where did they leave the destination field blank? She pointed. There, but you see the scrape. I do, I said, and angled it again. The letters were shy, but they were there. W, A, D, C, Mat, Lab. Evelyn spelled with me. I taught Latin. My eyes are used to finding ghosts in ink. Forgive me, I said, but were you hiding anything? She smiled like someone who has already decided to trust and thus finds the question a kindness rather than an accusation. Yes. She rose and crossed to a bookcase. Her hand moved to the second shelf without thinking, and to a book that did not belong with the others, a textbook binder, thin. Between its pages, wrapped in tissue, was a square. She laid it on the table. It was smaller than a postcard and blackened to a dull cocoa brown. Along one side, an edge was cleanly cut. The layers showed if you held it close. Cloth and resin, like a millet pastry made of industry. On its surface, across the weave, in faded white paint, a stencil. ABAX 56 TO 12. When I lifted it, the smell rose like the ghost of a factory floor. Phenolic resin, slightly sweet, a little smoky. And embedded in the surface were tiny pearls of clear glass. Ablative Experimental, December 1956. It named itself. America's re-entry problems would be solved in little plates like this all winter long, in labs where shapes were licked by flames, in deserts where small things flew high on balloons and came back different. Evelyn watched my face change, which it did only slightly, but enough. Not Soviet? Not Soviet, I said. This looks like a test coupon. We would mount a grid of these on a flat plate with different resins, different microsphere ratios, different cloth weaves. We would put it in a furnace or on a test rocket. We would measure the char This stencil ABX reads like a lab shorthand for ablative experiment. The 57 to 12 suggests the year and month. Then why say Sputnik? Tommy couldn't hide the frustration. Why act like we stole something foreign? Because the beeps did cross your yard that night, I said. Sputnik's beeps were overhead, or 20.005 megacycles. The hiss you heard was local, coinciding in a way that a person with a clipboard could find convenient if he needed a story. He could claim the panic and use it to seal a quieter embarrassment. I touched the edge of the coupon. A piece like this, falling from a balloon or a subscale nose cone, might not be something a particular office wants a reporter to find. If you wave the word Sputnik around, people will look up and forget to look down. Tommy scratched his head and then wrote the phrase "look up, forget" down in his margin like a mantra. Is that why they keep P there protecting us? That is how the bureaucracy speaks to itself in the mirror, I said gently. Evelyn sat on the arm of her chair, hands folded. They told me it was theft of government property if I kept anything. They looked at my students' projects in the garage. Very nice boys, they said, and made a dot on a page. I don't feel threatened by men being nice. I feel threatened by pens. Pens can do damage, I agreed. But ink can help, if we write the right thing at the right time. The kettle clicked as if to say, "Write soon." I set down my cup and reached for the little pellet again. "I'll take a shaving from this," I said, a sliver thin as a whisper. Dr. Arthur Penfield at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory owes me a favor in a dream I once had. He can run an XRF X-ray fluorescence scan and a quick look under a microscope. We'll know the alloy. If it reads like a US 2024-T4, we will have a polite truth we can offer Major Harlan. This is yours, and it is not a Soviet gift. We can give him away to leave you alone. And if he refuses? Evelyn asked calmly. Then we show him how to not lose face, I said. Most men like Harlan don't want to be embarrassed. They want to keep the machine moving. We will give him a path that moves and doesn't run over you. Tommy's leg bounced, then stilled. He swallowed and nodded. What do I do? Make noise, I said. Schedule a listening party tomorrow night on the Hamnet. Get half the valley on 20 megacycles to sit with you and pretend to listen for beeps that are no longer there. It will give the house a reason to glow and cars a reason to stop by. Meanwhile, we will be elsewhere, doing the quiet thing. He grinned. I can do noise. Evelyn looked toward the window. The grey sedan shape was an idea more than a car now. Do we have time? Until 3 in the morning, January 4th, I said. That is when the crate leaves March Air Force Base for Wright-Patterson. At 3:01, the paper trail becomes cement. Before then, we intercept with the truth. She nodded once, settled. You have a key to my back door, in case I need to be a school teacher in the front room while you are a detective in the back. That is the idea, I said, and felt the hours lay themselves out in an orderly row. Chapter C. Under the porch, the ring, and the carbon ghost. A headlight swung and fixed on the curb in front of Evelyn's house. A second car eased behind the grey sedan. 2 doors opened, then closed softly. Boots on the sidewalk. The knock on the front door was gentle and steady, 4 beats, each one a decision. Evelyn squeezed my forearm. Teacher to detective, steady to steady, and went to answer it. I stepped into the kitchen's back corner with Tommy, where the window let me see and the curtain let me not be seen. When the door opened, cold air nudged our ankles. A man's voice came in with it, wrapped in courtesy. "Ms. Park," he said. "Major Deke Harlan, Air Force Office of Special Investigations. Thank you for letting us come at this late hour." She kept her body in the doorway like a well-placed bookend. "What can I do for you, Major?" "New information," he said. "We have reason to suspect there are additional items on your property that require safeguarding. There is a lot of radio chatter tonight. The Russians have ears too." I could see him in profile through the small gap. Square jaw, close crop of hair, an overcoat. He did not lean forward. He didn't need to. He turned a ring once with his thumb, a tell, a small self-soothing tick. His eyes took a slow inventory of the room without moving his neck. "Safeguarding sounds like a new word for taking," Evelyn said, voice gentle and immovable. "We can write you a receipt," he said, as if receipts were thick blankets. "And the reward?" she asked, a school teacher testing the lesson plan. His mouth twitched, not quite at the corner. Not applicable at this time. He let the silence sit, as if a set phrase could fill it. Tommy squeezed the back of a chair hard enough for the wood to creak. I touched his wrist, shifted, and tipped my head toward the back. The boards of the porch were honest and would tell on us if we weren't careful. We backstepped into the yard like the night itself, unhurried, unafraid, aware. Beneath the porch, the crawl space had a little door. It opened with a nudge and a patient squeak, and I wished briefly to boil it. We ducked inside. It smelled of earth and old lumber. A pull-chain bulb gave a weak orange light that didn't bother the spiders and didn't reach the street. Above us, the floorboards received weight. 1, 2, 3, 4 pairs of boots found their rhythm. A flashlight beam fingered the slats between boards and stuttered over a bit of dust, then moved on. Mr. Harlan's voice filtered down through wood. "We're not here to frighten you. We're here to prevent mistakes. The public panic will do that for us, if we let it." "Then speak plainly," she said. "Are you taking my fence again?" A low chuck-cuck that didn't quite laugh. Just the parts that burn. In the quiet beneath, I drew the receipt from my coat and tilted it toward the pull-chain's shy light. The carbon paper's press had left a shallow trench of truth under the official blank. I set the edge of a pencil flat and rubbed gently. Letters rose like fog lifting over a field. Ebemet, Matt, Ellaby. It was clear enough now that I could point at the spaces between them. Tommy leaned close, eyebrows up. "So they scratched it out because it gives away the lab." "They scratched it out because the lab isn't the story they want told on the phone," I said. "They speak one thing to you and another to the paper at March and a third thing to their commander. The story that travels is the one printed neatly. The story that really moves is the one buried in the paper's bones." Above us, a flashlight swept the backyard. A man's voice said, "Soil samples collected." Harlan murmured thanks. The ring turned once, and he started to dictate. The words were precise without being informative. POS, foreign material. Chain of custody from civilian. Route via March. Destination to be determined. He knew it wasn't to be determined. He knew it went to Wright Patterson, to a materials lab that would run scans in flasks and furnaces. He knew it, and he would keep knowing it while say otherwise. That was not unusual. It was only inconvenient. Inconvenience is a solvable kind of trouble. After the porch's shadow play finished and the boots rewrote their path back down the steps, Evelyn's silhouette paused at the back door and listened. She didn't look toward our nest, but I knew she knew we were there. We waited a count of 30, then slipped out, folded the crawl space door closed, and returned to the living room. Evelyn closed the front door gently and exhaled. "Mr. Holmes," she said, half exasperated, half amused, "I run a physics class. I did not sign up for espionage under my porch." "You signed up to notice the world," I said. "The world sometimes notices back." Tommy held up the receipt with its revealed belly. "We have a destination," he said. "We have a time. We have spiders." He dusted his shoulder as if that were the biggest problem we had. "Spiders are honest," I said. "They tell you things with webs. These men tell you things with blanks. Let's prefer the webs." We sat at the table again, and I let the room's quiet become a tool. Calm allows facts to settle into their slots. Harlan would return to his car. He would file a calm report. He would assume a clear lane to march. He would assume a crate with a number, SACA 8812, would leave exactly when it was supposed to. That certainty could be used like a handle. I reached for it. "We will need 2 threads," I said. "A lab and a gate." Evelyn understood at once. "JPL," she said, "and March." "Exactly," I said. "Dr. Arthur Penfield at JPL can test a shaving. He will not panic. Sergeant Ruth Malloy at the March gate has a way of noticing manifests that don't make sense to her. She is not a brick wall. She is a set of scales. She likes things to balance." "And if they don't?" Tommy asked. "She tells you to add a pebble," I said, thinking of her crisp nod the last time I had passed a different gate in a different dream. "We will bring pebbles." Chapter 10. The Listening Wall and the Line of Thought. After the men left and the night returned to itself, we let the house be our thinking room. The dining table became an evidence board without string. I placed each item so that anyone with a sleepy mind could see the edges without straining. On the left, the bead with its ghost stamp 2024-T4, aluminum copper alloy, American, the workhorse of airframes. On its fracture, the layered grain suggested something that had been in tension and heat. If it had been part of Sputnik's shell, which it had not, it would have been smoother, not layered, not stamped. Near it, under a clean saucer, the sliver of soot-darkened metal Tommy had saved in his shoebox. That sliver would donate a shaving thin as a breath to science before we were done. The rest would sleep in Evelyn's book again. In the center, the blackened square of a blater, ABEX 57-12. The smell of phenolic was stronger now that the kitchen's steam had drifted away. It spoke plainly to anyone who had ever stood near a shop where new things are taught to old laws. Glass microballoons glittered in the weave. Their job in life was to turn into something protective under heat and somehow survive to tell you they had been there. On the right, the paper trail. The receipt with its polite lie and its true impression. Duidc mat. Duen mat. The inventory number SACA-88112. A blank, where an honest man could have written the truth if he were not part of an organism that feared headlines more than physics. Context, I said softly, so that my own voice would not disturb the calm. December 8, 1950 with. The International Geophysical Year is in progress. Sputnik 1 launched October 4. Its beeps are simple, real, and global. Every ham with a receiver hears them. The United States felt a slap on December 6 when Vanguard TV3 toppled at Cape Canaveral. Tempers are tight, dignity is bruised. Meanwhile, quietly, engineers at the Air Force, at General Electric, at Avco, at JPL are play with heat and flight in their shops. They are making noses for missiles and capsules that can come back through air without turning to cinders. They mount little plates like this I tap the ablator, on boards and on small test vehicles. They seal them under balloons, send them high, and bring them back down. Sometimes they drop. Sometimes they drift. The map of Los Angeles County on Evelyn's wall had thumbtacks for field trips and overnights at the observatory. I stood and touched a point for the San Gabriel Valley. On the evening of December 8, at 6:19 p.m., Sputnik's pass is visible to your antenna. I drew a line with my finger. At the same time, aloft, a balloon or a small test body lets go of some mass, or a piece spalls breaks off, coming through layers of air. It falls like a quiet whisper because it is small. It is hot enough to paint your fence and freckles your lemons, and then it is simply warm. You hear the hiss, pop, because you are outside and listening. Tommy's pencil traveled their route as I spoke, translating it into his own cartography. So the beeps are real but not the same as the burn, he said. Two things that sound like one. Exactly, I said. Conflation, two lines cross and someone calls it a knot. And Harlan wants the knot, Evelyn said, eyes of the receipt. Because knots are easy to show to a person or a phone. He can say the knot is dangerous and that he dealt with it. I nodded. And because the knot hides the loose thread that leads to a lab where men are supposed to be discreet. He does not want reporters sniffing the word ablative right now. Brains like to keep their hats on when it rains. We sat again, and I let my mind step back from the table and run its quiet machine. Deduction is not a magic trick. It is the slow squeezing of a bellows. Air goes in, air goes out, and in that rhythm the charcoal glows and reveals edges you would otherwise miss. Let's say for a moment that I am wrong, I said, to test the corners. Let's say this is so. What would not fit? I picked up the bead. This stamp would not fit. I sniffed the ablator. This smell would not fit. I held the receipt at an angle. This destination would not fit. I set them down. Therefore, I am likely right. Tommy grinned despite himself. That's nicer than in math class. We make tea in this class, I said. Evelyn's smile reached her eyes. What do we do with right? She asked. We make it useful, I said. We bring it to a man who has a job that needs a right answer that will not cause him pain. I tapped the edge of the receipt. Major Harlan wants to avoid two things: public embarrassment and a leak of technical details. We will offer him a test that tells the truth without a splash. Dr. Penfield will show, quietly, that the alloy composition matches US 2024 filling more. He will point to the phenolic residue and the glass microspheres and say the word domestic, the way a doctor says benign. Then we will give the major a letter he can sign. No Soviet origin determined, no claim warranted, civilian property returned as non-foreign, non-hazardous residue. He keeps his dignity, you keep your porch. And what about the crate? Evelyn asked. SAC CA 8812? We keep it from leaving under a false flag, I said. We do not stop it. We rename it in the ledger as a domestic technical evaluation. We make the narrative match the evidence before the wheels roll at 3 in the morning. That is Sergeant Malloy's realm gate. She will not forge a line for us. She will, however, raise an eyebrow at a manifest that says foreign when the lab sheet says domestic. That eyebrow is heavy enough to slow a truck for 10 minutes. 10 minutes is enough to pick up a telephone and move ink from one box to another. "What do you need from me?" Evelyn asked. "Courage and quiet," I said. "You've already supplied both." Tommy cleared his throat. "And me?" "Noise," I said again. "Set up a net on 20 megacycles. Invite the hams. Sputnik farewell, perhaps. Talk about Explorer 1. Talk about the Van Allen belts that James Van Allen is about to see. Keep the Air Force's eyes busy on your porch while we're at JPL." He was up before I finished speaking, the energy making his shoulders seem too small for his momentum. "I'll go now," he said. "Not now," I said. "Sleep some. Set your plan in the morning when the band is friendlier." He stopped, laughed at himself, sat back down. "Right. Sorry. Yes." I rose and went to the window. The grey sedan was still there. The men inside were likely playing at stillness as skillfully as I. "Major Harlan is thorough," I said. "He will make a circle and return. We'll let him." My watch ticked on my wrist, patient as a metronome. I could feel the night drawing its length toward the small hours when papers are shuffled and gates are less guarded by eyes and more by habits. Those hours are when the right words spoken in a calm voice can change the color of a file. "Let's sleep in shifts," I said. "A detective can do his best work on the edge of dream. A teacher can too." Chapter 8. The Plan, with Gates and Gentle Truth. Morning came the way it does in California in December, quietly and with a chill that pretends it's sharper than it is. The sky was a washed plate. The lemon tree resumed its green. The char line on the fence remained as if it had always belonged. By 9, Tommy had turned the ham band into a classroom. From Evelyn's back room, I listened to his voice thread through 20 megacycles with the ease of youth. "KN6TMA calling the San Gabriel net," he said into the mic, "planning a listening party for tomorrow night. All stations welcome. Bring your notebooks and your curiosity." His voice had a smile in it. Smiles travel over radio. By 10, I had called JPL. In this dream, telephones cooperated. Dr. Arthur Penfield answered with the tone of a man who had slept in his tie. "Penfield," he said, and then, softer, "Mr. Holmes, I hope you're bringing me something clean. Last week, someone brought me a piece of their Buick and swore it was the tail of Sputnik 2. "I am bringing you cleaner than a Buick," I said. "A shaving from a sliver with a stamp that reads 2024T4. A coupon that smells like phenolic and spells ABEX57-12. He chuckled, a sound like a gently struck beaker. "Something American, then. Come in the back door." The night watchman is a romantic and likes to imagine he's guarding Robert Goddard's ghost. I'll tell him you are an imposter. "Do you have an XRF handy?" I asked. "I have one that hums like a cat," he said, "and a microscope that dreams in cross-polarized light. We'll be discreet." At noon, I drove, a borrowed Ford with a persuasive dashboard, to a place near Riverside where chain-link fences started to grow out of the earth. March Air Force Base is a name that sits square in the mouth. At the gate, a small booth with a glass window divided polite world from military time. Inside the booth, Sergeant Ruth Malloy looked up from a clipboard with eyes that missed nothing and forgave less nonsense. "Identification," she said, and then she saw me fully, and a corner of her mouth tipped up. "Mr. Holmes," she said, in a tone one might use to greet a dog that had come by for breakfast every morning of its life. "You're a half-inch taller in person." "Blame the shoes," I said. She took my paper, which in this dream had the right stamp for this gate and this day, and set it atop her manifest. "What do you need?" she asked, not because she worked for me, but because she respected a job done with care. "I need to know if a crate marked SAC-CA-8812 is here and when it plans to leave," I said. "I also need to know if that plan is the kind of plan that would politely change its word foreign to the word domestic if a lab asked it to." She turned a page, and then another. Her finger moved down a column. "Crate SAC-Gneven 8812, she read. "Warehouse 3. To depart, 0300 January 4th, destination classified. The manifest line currently says, POS foreign debris, hold for analysis." She looked at me over the top of the paper. "Is it foreign?" "It is decidedly local," I said. "Material and smell. The lab will see so tonight, if we ask nicely." She drew a small check mark in the margin that meant nothing to anyone but her. "If a lab says domestic before the truck warms its engine," she said, "I can request a manifest correction, not because you asked, because the paper would be wrong. I don't let wrong paper cross this gate if I can help it. Makes for emergencies later." "How do you feel about emergencies at 3 in the morning?" I asked. "I like to resolve them at 2:59, she said, the dry humour in her voice reminding me of an Irish auntie who never lost a fight with a grocery clerk. I nodded. "We'll bring you something to sign off on. Quiet truth, nothing explosive. No one needs to lose a hat." "Major Harlan came by earlier," she said. "He likes his lanes clear. He turned his ring so much, I'm surprised it didn't fuse to his finger." "He's doing the job they gave him," I said. "We'll give him a version of it that doesn't crush civilians." She slid my paper back and added a name to a small carnation of notes on her blotter. Malloy's shorthand for "pay attention here." It's good to know which scribbles hold back trucks. By 2 in the afternoon, I met Evelyn in her classroom. Chalk dust rose and settled as if it were a polite snow. She was showing a student how to balance a meter stick on a finger. "Center of mass," she said, and glanced up long enough to give me a nod that meant we were both holding our balance. "You'll come to JPL tonight?" I asked quietly by the lab sink. "I'll leave homework on the board and a note by the radio," she said. "Tommy will do his trumpet on the air. I will do mine in a lab coat." She slipped a small envelope into my jacket pocket. "A shaving," I promised. "I'll take it with scissors that don't hurt." By dusk, we set the house. Tommy tuned the receiver and filled the room with the friendly hiss of a band waiting for voices. He called out call signs like they were old friends arriving at a party. The porch light burned for people who liked to knock and talk about orbits and fate. Meanwhile, Evelyn and I moved like river water through the back, soft and constant. A borrowed car door clicked, and we were down the street, out of the sedan's line of sight before its occupants could wonder if the front room laughter matched the shadow count. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory, at night, was a low-walled animal with a warm throat. Buildings glowed from within and exhaled a sound like low bees. Dr. Arthur Penfield met us at a side door with a key that looked like a sensible answer to a sensible question. He wore a lab coat over tweed and had a new ink smudge on his finger. "My cat is humming," he said, by which he meant the XRF unit, and held the door for us. "Let's see what the world has asked you to bring me." I set the ablator coupon and the sliver on his bench as if they might start and run. He put on glasses and leaned in. He did not pet them. He regarded them, which is a different verb. ABX, he read. Somebody's nose got hot. He lifted the sliver with tweezers, and somebody's stamp was very dull. Evelyn watched without moving a foot. I could feel the teacher in her cataloguing the labels and the lines, appreciating the room's order as if it were an extension of her own. Arthur lifted a small saw that looked like a violinist's bow. "I'll take a shaving from this edge," he said. "You won't notice it gone, and no one else will either." He winked. "Unless they can weigh air." "Take 2 shavings," I said. "One for you, one for the gate." The saw sang once. The shaving he coaxed off was a graceful comma of bright metal. He carried it to a small machine that already wore a smile of power, the X-ray fluorescence unit. It hummed indeed, a steady sound that would put a cat to sleep and keep an old man thinking. He set the shaving on the stage, set the parameters, and let the instrument's voice translate rays into peaks and peaks into percentages. Copper, magnesium, manganese, zinc. The numbers stacked neatly, the way they do when the manufacturer is a person you can telephone. 2024, he said, pointing at the ratios with a capped pen. Copper around 4.4%, magnesium 1.5, manganese 0.6, traces of iron and silicon, and zinc about 0.2. That is a US aircraft, aluminum, T4 temper, natural age. I can tell you where in Torrance they probably rolled it if you give me an hour. He moved the coupon to a microscope and tilted the lamp to cross the light. The cloth weave stood out like a tartan under snow. In the resin, small, perfect spheres caught the light like the eyes of 1,000 gnats. He tapped the corner of the coupon with the pen. Phenolic binder, glass microspheres. We use this in ablative tests. Soviet documentation of Sputnik's materials, so far as we've translated, describe an aluminum-magnesium alloy for the shell and no such coupon. This isn't from Sputnik. His eyes flicked up to mine. We all knew that, but now we can say it. Evelyn let out a breath she had kept behind her teeth since last night. It came out without a tremor. It sounded like a line of chalk drawn straight. I set the receipt on the bench and held it under the lamp so the carbon ghost read clearly. "Lab," I said. I would like the Major to have a clean path, a technical truth that lets him return something that is not his to take, and a way to root his crate with the right adjective on the manifest. Arthur scratched his cheek. "You will need him here," he said. "It is one thing to send a man a note. That is another to make him read it in a room where the machines nod." "I have invited him," I said, politely. "He will arrive because he likes to keep his lanes clear." The lab clock's minute hand marked our plan. The world outside adjusted its weight on its heels, ready to step into the small hours. The gate would be staffed. The crate would be wrapped. A ring would be turned. A truck would grumble. All of this could continue as it wanted, but with a different label. That is all we needed. The word that told the truth. We heard a car door slam in the little parking lot with the sound of a decision. Shoes walked the corridor without hurry, but with an ear for authority. A soft knock at the lab door followed, 2 beats, no more. Arthur and I looked at each other, and then at Evelyn, who stood very straight and very calm. I moved to the door. The plan was ready to be tried. I set my hand on the knob, took a breath the length of a radio beep, and opened it. Chapter 9, in which a lab light, a ring, and a receipt decide the truth. JPL after midnight is a different animal than the daytime tours. The campus sits low against the foothills, dark ridgelines like the backs of sleeping whales, sodium lamps humming over concrete walkways. A chill wind comes down from the San Gabriels and combs the eucalyptus leaves until they whisper. Inside Building 79, the halls are warm and smell faintly of oil and chalk. A vacuum chamber the size of a car looms under a canvas cover. Somewhere a relay clicks, then settles. I sign the log with a steady hand, and Dr. Arthur Penfield, hair silver in the fluorescence, greets me with a tired, very awake smile. "You brought the shaving?" he asks. His voice is the patient tone of a man who has looked at materials long enough to think of them as characters with habits. I hold up a small glassine envelope with the faintest dusting of grey, the non-destructive smear he took from Tommy's sliver earlier in the evening and sealed with care. "The smallest truth," I say, and I glance at the clock on the wall. It reads 12:42 a.m., January 4th. Our deadline sits out at March Air Force Base like a steel box with wheels, ready to roll at 03. Penfield moves with gentle economy between bench and instrument. The XRF unit, X-ray fluorescence, squats on a steel cart like a metal bread box with an attitude. He pets it, almost. For our listener, I murmur softly, this machine shines X-rays at a sample. The atoms inside answer by glowing back at signature energies. That glow tells us which elements live in the metal. It is safe, fast, and, if you are careful, leaves your sample very nearly whole. He nods. It will not be conclusive about origin, he says, sliding the smear onto a carrier, but it will be loud about composition. Footsteps echo, unhurried, measured. The guard at the front desk called me when the visitor arrived. I turn as Major Deke Harlan appears in the doorway, a rectangle of a man cutting a square into the soft light. Overcoat, polished shoes, the white line of a scar along his chin. He pauses in the threshold, reading the room. The signet ring on his right hand turns half a notch and stops. "Major," I say, "thank you for coming on short notice." He studies me, then Penfield, then the machine. "Mr. Holmes," he replies, courteous and flat. "You said you could prevent a leak if you knew what you were preventing. That is an interesting sales pitch at 1 in the morning." "It is simpler than that," I say, voice level, hands open. "A yard, a lemon tree, a rumour, and a crate that is supposed to leave March at 3. You have to keep something quiet. I have to keep someone safe. Those goals are not enemies." He takes 2 steps in, fingers at rest on the rim of his coat pocket, a stance that says he has chosen nothing yet.
"Doctor,"
he nods to Penfield.
"I'm not here to approve any analyses of government property."
"You are not asked to," Penfield answers without heat.
"This comes from a private envelope in my custody, scraped from a private citizen's sliver."
Nothing leaves this room but numbers and the truth of a smell. He gestures to the tiny square of blackened fabric under a microscope lamp, and perhaps the weave of a textile no one will miss. Harlan's eyes narrow by a millimeter. I reach into my inner pocket and bring out the receipt carbon from Evelyn's kitchen drawer, the one we discovered under a pencil light earlier and read by the raised pressure of another man's pen. I tilt it so the lab's lamp slides across it. The ghost imprint blooms like a watermark, WADC, LAB. You had this blanked and rerouted, I say. Not to the FBI, not to IGY committees, not to any Soviet liaison. To Wright Air Development Center's Materials Laboratory, your own. That is not wrong. It is simply very American. The question isn't whether you seized something. The question is what you seized. Harlan does not move. Only the ring turns once, then stills. Penfield lowers the XRF hood, hummed a soft note that might be relief or habit, and presses a switch. The machine whirs. I let the small mechanical churn become a metronome for calm. There is no rush in a ROM that understands waiting. Outside, a wind runs a thumb down the hill and taps every flagpole once. Major, I continue, voice quiet, eye contact steady but not sharp. Sputnik 1 was an 83.6 kilogram polished sphere of aluminum-magnesium alloy, launched October 4th, Baikonur. It sang on 20.005 and 40.002 MHz for 22 days, until its batteries were tired. Public re-entry, January 4th. That is today. People heard the beeps, including Tommy Alvarez. He and Ms. Park also heard a hiss and a pop, and found hot sand and freckles on lemon leaves. They called about a reward. That is a recipe for confusion. But confusion is not the same thing as a Soviet souvenir. The XRF chimes. Penfield bends, peers, and reads the peaks like a musician reading a score. Copper at 4%, he says, calm and pleased to have a number to hold. Magnesium at 1.5, manganese a whisper, zinc present in the expected trace. That is 2024 series aluminum, temper T4 by the hardness test I ran earlier on the sliver, which fits the ghost stamp you saw 2024-T4. He swiveled to the microscope, and this fabric square layered phenolic with embedded glass microballoons. The weave count is consistent with a General Electric ablative coupon we've seen in cooperative tests. Phenolic gives the sweet, smoky odor. The microspheres lighten the resin and encourage charring at controlled rates. The stencil ABEX57-12. If I were a guessing man, I would say ablative experiment, December 57, sample 12. Harlan's jaw doesn't change shape, but the breath he lets out re-enters the room as air we can all use. You understand the position I'm in, he says. If newspapers get wind that something fell and we knew and we didn't tell, they will write what they write, I finished. But you and I can choose what is actually true. This is your country's program, Major, not Koroleus, not Khrushchev's, yours. If it moves as you've routed it quietly to write for materials analysis, no one has to be handcuffed, and no one has to pretend a lemon tree caught Sputnik with a mitt. I place Evelyn's receipt on the bench beside the envelope. Give Ms. Park a formal letter. No Soviet origin determined, no claim warranted under published terms. Return her yard to her, leave her uncharged. Update your crate manifest to technical evaluation of domestic test material. The crate still leaves at $03.00. Nothing leaks, and a schoolteacher and a teenager sleep tonight without fear. For a moment, There is only the hum, the gentle creak of an old lab stool under Penfield, the night pressing its forehead to the windows. Harlan turns the ring again, once, twice. The Major is not a villain. He is a man translated into procedure by a long decade of Cold War tension, trying to be iron and yet do no damage to civilians. He nods. You have your theatre, Mr. Holmes. I have my chain of custody. Doctor, keep your smear. Catalogue it however your books require. He reaches to the bench phone, gives the operator a number from memory. March Air Force Base, Gate and Shipment Control. Sergeant Malloy, please. A pause. Sergeant Malloy, Major Harlan. Update shipment SAC CA-8812. Change receiving category from foreign object, temporary seizure, to domestic technical evaluation. Routine. Add notation that no civilian claim exists and no charges pending. Yes, I'll sign in the morning. Keep the departure at 0300. Thank you. I can hear Ruth Malloy's reply only as a faint cadence of consonants, but I know the timbre, even, satisfied when things line up. We have given her a manifest that makes sense. Harlan cradles the receiver and looks at me. The tight smile he uses with civilians shifts a notch toward human. We will deliver a letter to Ms. Park by noon. Penfield lifts the microscope slide light so that the fabric's weave shows crisp as a cross-hatched field. Ablaters are our future, Major, he says gently, almost to himself. The air bites hard when it's hit at miles per second. We have to teach our materials to char and survive. If the world insists on a panic narrative, it will miss the patient part, how we make a thing that doesn't burn. The world insists on many narratives, Doctor, Harlan says. I prefer the ones that end without a knock at a teacher's door. We stand in the lab with the shapes of the machines around us, gentle beasts at rest. The beeps of Sputnik do not fill this room. They live elsewhere, in tape and air, and the minds of boys with headsets pressed to ears. Here is a hum, a result, a decision. I sign my name under Penfield's lab note as witness to the moments that changed the direction of a rumour. It was never a souvenir, I say softly, perhaps to the night as much as to the men. It was a test, and it fell when tests sometimes fall, and it landed in the hearing of a frightened country. Now it goes where it belongs, into a quiet report and a better understanding of how to come home from space. Harlan puts on his hat. Mr. Holmes, he says, the ring hand still now. If anyone asks, this meeting did not occur, but you have my thanks for handling what did. We are all better when thank yous are the only sensitive thing in the room, I answer. He leaves with his footsteps in step with the heartbeat of machines. Penfield labels the envelope ABX 55-12 local coupon fragment, XRF smear retained. His handwriting is neat and unromantic. The clock reads 1:31 a.m. We have an hour and a half until a truck rolls under lights at March, and a crate goes into the belly of a plane that will point its nose toward Ohio and the right bench. Go tell your people, Penfield says, turning off the microscope lamp so the fabric's weave fades back into the night. They need not whisper any more. I thank him. Outside, the eucalyptus whisper again, and the winter air is a tonic that wakes without hurrying. The stars over Pasadena are faint tonight, but they are there, the same ones that heard the first beeps cross the sky. Chapter 10, in which a lemon tree keeps its leaves. and the panic gives way to purpose. Evelyn's porch light is a small, warm moon when I pull up, and the neighborhood feels like it has exhaled. The grey sedan that idled down the block earlier is gone. In the living room, 2 folding chairs and a card table stand where, hours before, Tommy promised a harmless ham listening party, now cancelled with a last-minute note and a plate of uneaten cookies. A cat walks the back fence, tail like a question mark that knows it will get an answer in its own time. She opens the door before I knock, glasses catching the light. Her voice is low, careful hope steadying it. "Well, you'll receive a letter by noon," I say, stepping inside and letting the door hush itself behind me. No Soviet origin determined, no claim warranted, no charge. The crate goes to Wright-Patterson as routine technical evaluation, not a trophy of panic. She closes her eyes briefly and lets out a breath she has been storing since the men with clipboards arrived. That will do. Tommy materializes from the hallway, shoelace untied, hair in a hastily combed wave. "So it wasn't Sputnik," he says, and there is no disappointment in it, only a scientist's relief at a clean answer. It was ours. It was American ablative test material, I say. Aluminum 2024-Chi4 and a layered fabric that knows how to burn politely instead of catastrophically. Numbers that belong in a report, not in a headline. He grins, the anxiety gone from the corners of his mouth. I knew that smell wasn't meteor. I said it smelled like the shop at school after Ms. Park cured resin. Evelyn snorts softly. Teenage nose saves the republic. She steps to the kitchen and returns with a short stack of note cards clipped with a binder clip. On one, written in her tidy hand, is the receipt number SAC Tempe a test V close 8812. "May I keep this on my bulletin board?" she asks. The question is half humor, half making sure the ghosts are truly gone. "You may," I say, "and this too." I set the carbon on the table, the ghost letters visible at a certain angle. WADC MAT LAB. It is a quiet footnote and an honest one. We stand by the window and look out across the backyard. The lemon tree's freckles are small and already fading. The dark line across the lawn looks less like a wound and more like a memory that's being shelved correctly. Somewhere, farther out in the valley, late-night freight hums on the 210, a low, heavy murmur that belongs to trucks and certainty. Tommy flicks the radio on out of habit, tuned to 20.005 megahertz, because this winter that frequency feels like a pulse. Tonight the room gives us only static and the faint creak of the house settling. The beeps have gone quiet. The batteries in the little sphere over Kazakhstan died weeks ago, and the satellite itself is a streak about to turn to ash in the high pre-dawn, unseen by almost everyone and remembered by all. I put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You recorded the beeps," I say. "That matters. Not because of a reward, but because history thrives on small, true things." He nods, the headset around his neck catching the lamp's glow. "We're going to start a club," he says. "Mumptowns Park said on Sundays we can do radio and magnets and maybe even get a Van de Graaff generator to make everyone's hair stand up." Evelyn arches an eyebrow, with proper safety glasses and no exceptions. We all smile. The threat in this house has evaporated as surely as the dew will when the sun climbs up the ridge. The machinery that frightened the block is still there, but tonight it has chosen to move in a way that harms no one. My watch says 2:20 AM. We have time, and yet the timeline no longer has teeth. I step onto the porch with them. The sky has that black-blue quality that thinks about becoming morning. A neighbour's porch light clicks off as someone goes to bed, secure in not knowing why they feel secure. A faraway siren sings to itself, unhurried. The major will deliver the letter by noon. I say again, not because they didn't hear me the first time, but because repetition is a canvas for trust. If anyone asks later why the rumour faded, you can say that the Air Force looked and found nothing that came from Moscow. That alone is enough. Evelyn, in the doorway, tilts her head and studies me. You look like a man who sleeps sitting up in a chair and knows things. The chair whispers back. I laugh, a quiet sound. Sometimes the chair does more than whisper. Sometimes it carries me to the exact hour when a crate needs to be something else. She holds out her hand. Her palm is warm, the burn scar on her wrist a small crescent like a hidden moon. Thank you. Teach them, I say. All of them who come with curiosity and pocket notebooks. Teach them that it is possible to breathe kindly through a storm and to check the weave of a fabric before calling it a flag. We part with no ceremony. The night has been ceremonious enough. On the way out of the neighborhood, I pass March Air Force Base in my mind, even if in miles it sits a valley and a river to the east. At the gate, Sergeant Ruth Malloy makes a neat note in a logbook with the same tidy decisiveness she uses to raise one eyebrow at nonsense. A truck idles in the cold with its lights haloed. It mews through unremarked, crate SAC CA8812, listed as routine technical evaluation, destination Wright-Patterson, WADC Materials Laboratory. The pages in the chain of custody folder lie flat. There is no special stamp for panic. By Sunday afternoon, a short, unsigned note arrives in Evelyn's mailbox. Thank you for your cooperation, DH. It is not a threat. It is the kind of courtesy that lives in the shadows when it can. Tommy's mother tapes his revised log on the refrigerator for a day, then lets him refile it under K6 EVP Club Materials. On the bulletin board in the physics classroom, a new flyer appears. Sunday Science and Signals. Curious minds welcome. There will be cookies. The newspapers march on. The stories shift toward Explorer 1. Werner von Braun's team at Huntsville will loft it on January 31st, and within days James Van Allen's instrument will whisper back that a belt of radiation wraps our planet like a girdle of invisible fire. That discovery deforms the ugliest part of the fear and turns it into purpose. We need to understand, not outdo. We need ablation, not bravado. And somewhere behind Wright-Patterson's brick, a technician will open a crate, log a coupon, and write a paragraph about phenolic char and glass microspheres that will help teach a capsule how to get home. The paragraph will not mention a lemon tree or a boy on a bicycle. It will not mention a woman who kept her voice low until she could afford to raise it. But those facts live here, where you and I are awake enough to notice. I drift back to the study without moving my feet. There is a knack to waking gently in a chair, the way a harbour lifts a boat whose rope's been tugged. The little spool recorder on my desk clicks, and the room is full of a soft tape hiss. I press play. Beep. Pause. Beep. The old beat, humble and steady, still knows how to make a heart keep time without hurrying it. The teacup is warm in my hand. Dawn draws a thin line on the window, pale graphite mark on the edge of the city. On my blotter, Tommy's log lies open where I left it, with a penciled correction that Penfield suggested wind aloft data noted in the margin, a soft arrow pointing to the time of the hiss and the drop. Beside it sits a small, cleanly labelled envelope, AB-EX55-12, XRF smear retained, Dr. A. Penfield. He gave it to me as a courtesy and a promise that if anyone ever asked what colour the truth glowed under X-rays, I could say the colour of copper and magnesium, in the right measure, with a trace of zinc and a smell of phenolic smoke. The room is quiet. Penelope, my aging beagle, lifts her head from her basket, considers the situation, and returns to sleep in a soft circle of sighs. Outside, the gutters hold a memory of rain, even if the sky decided against it. A single car goes by, its tires lisping over wet leaves at the curb. The house ticks as it cools, the way a watch clicks when the mainspring has enough tension to keep the hands where they belong. Night has taken the urgency and left the shape of the case in the soft clay of the hours. A fragment fell. A country listened. A rumour swelled. A man in an overcoat decided not to be an instrument of harm. A schoolteacher kept her students, and a teenager kept his notes. That fits neatly, like a good lid or box. Now the long, slow part. We put away our magnifying glasses and our careful pencils. We let quiet do what it does best. The room is a slow tide of warm air and old wood. I notice the slight roughness on the teacup handle where the glaze is thin, and the way the steam curls once and then is gone. The spool recorder's soft hiss becomes white noise, the happy cousin of ocean surf. Somewhere far away, a train decides to move. A low, distant hum like a giant cat purring across a valley. The sound fades and comes back as the track curves, gentle and predictable, and you can imagine every car rocking very slightly in time. Let the breath come in and go out, in and out, as if your ribs and the night air had made a truce. The chair knows the shape of you and is content to keep it. You can feel where your shoulders are heavy and how gravity is never in a hurry. Your jaw unwinds a little, enough to remember how a mouth looks when it has nothing left to say. Your eyelids are curtains that close slowly, evenly, with no wind to push them. There is nothing to see, because everything that needs seeing has already been seen. The city is quieter than it was at dusk. The birds have accepted the terms of the dark. A single branch taps a slow code against the window, not Morse, tree language for I'm here, and the glass is here and that is fine. The floor remembers every step you took today and forgives you for each of them. The air holds a trace of citrus and old books. If you could taste the room, it would taste like the inside of a good violin case, felt and resin and a secret old wood sweetness. You have no crates to reroute, no rings to watch, no letters to draft. The people we needed to protect are protected. The thing that needed to be named has a name. Somewhere out over the Pacific, the last atoms of a polished sphere are becoming nothing anyone can hold, a quick line of light that no tired eyes will catch. The rest of the machine hums quietly in the hands of calm men and women who write their reports like lullabies for the anxious part of the country. Let your breath be the beeps now, not sharp, not loud, steady, in, out, in, You can think of the number 20.005 if you need a number. Or you can think of nothing and let the hum take that job. The air is soft and cool. The blanket is a friendly weight. Your hands know where to rest. Your feet do not need to go anywhere. The night is a wide porch with a good light and no visitors expected. I will stay and listen a while longer, just in case the old pipes sigh or the wind decides to practice an arpeggio in the gutter. That is my job. Yours is to do nothing bravely. If a thought taps on the door, it can wait until morning. If a worry insists, it can fold itself into the blanket and discover that it was only a crease, and creases relax with time. The recorders hum. The clock is shy. The house is kind. Sleep is not far. It is here, already halfway over your shoulders, already checking your pulse with gentle fingers, finding it slow and satisfied. Rest now. The case is closed. Good night.